theorists have several sides to them. There's not only what they said in the context of their time, there's the logic of their argument to be considered, and what they've been taken to mean through the years. Because Locke qualifies the principle of property not only by the criterion, the test of labor, and the test of not letting things go to waste, but by a third principle as well, and that's the principle of scarcity. And Locke argues that the third condition of a right to property is that one leave enough and as good from the common domain. Now, in Locke's time, of course, this was not a major problem. It's hard to think of the England of Locke's day, but it was almost like the American frontier of the 19th century. We think of England today as a very densely populated country, but in the time that Locke lived, there were large strips of vacant land between the settlements. So one could relive the little fantasy that I gave. One could go out in the forest and appropriate from the commons, from the common domain. It was not an impossible proposition. And of course, in Lockean America, the frontier of the 19th century, there was free land to the west. And the answer to the question, what do you do about there being large concentration of property in the United States, or the fact that you were poor, was go west. There's land in Nebraska, there's land in Kansas, in Montana and beyond. Anyone can be a free farmer, at least until 1890. Yet Locke, out of logical consistency, saw the central problem in the central principle, that if people had a right to property, if people had a right to mix their labor with the things of this earth, then that had to be a right that was in some sense equally proportioned. It had to be a right that government would protect against monopoly. And that if any group or any individual monopolized property or took so much that no one else could get to it, then in fact the right had become self-contradictory. And people would find that an unfair condition too. Because if an individual in the state of nature argued appropriately that one had a right to which one mixed one's labor, and if there was nothing left to appropriate because somebody else had taken it all, that person would not rationally consent to be governed. And Locke, I think, recognized that further implication of his argument perfectly well. And in that sense, Locke, I think, foresaw the problem that Marx thought would be central to capitalism. For Marx never thought that capitalism was a bad thing. He thought it was simply self-contradictory. That when the proletariat realized that the principles of justice and equality upon which it was built, the natural rights upon which its legitimacy was proclaimed, were denied to them, that they would find that the system contradicted itself, that it bore within itself the seeds of its own destruction, and once they had achieved a true consciousness of the way things were in relationship to the natural rights they had been told that all people possessed, they would overthrow the system. Well, in that sense, Locke paved the way for Marx by setting criteria for the right of property that were logically necessary in some sense, and to complete the argument from property, and to universalize that right so that a rational man consenting to government would in fact do it that way. So looked at this way, we have both a conservative and a radical Locke potentially. We have a Locke that could defend a very limited state and what I would call something verging on perfect capitalism, in which one argues that governments exist to protect property and to take property for the benefit of those who have not mixed their labor with it would be theft, and that government commits theft when through taxation or expropriation it takes people's property that they have earned in the marketplace and uses it to help those who have not mixed their labor with it, with those things. And that's the conservative Locke. And one can make a very consistent argument for that Locke. But there's also a radical Locke, who might argue that people have the right to gain property by their work and effort, and when some can and do monopolize the property that is available to a society, then government has a duty to intervene to protect the rights of individuals to life, liberty, and property itself. It's not just existing property, it's the potential to get property, some would argue, that requires government intervention against large concentrations of wealth. And in that sense, Locke can be seen as the forerunner of a socialist ethic as well as a capitalist one.